Hey guys, I'm ready to read The People of Sparks, Chapter 7. Wow, I just finished Chapter 6 by myself, and I can't believe this character, Torin. He is really angry and upset, and he is not liking Lena. They had a little scuffle in the yard, and she threw an egg at him, but she didn't know what was going to happen when it cracked all over his shoulder. And then he ended up telling her about the 4 wars and the 3 plagues. Did I get that right? Double check. Yes, the 4 wars and the 3 plagues, which was basically the disaster that wiped out many of the people on the earth. And if you were listening, it sounded just like how we are now, talking about smooth roads and videos and movies and talking to one another across the world. So he was explaining to Lena a few of the things, and in the background, Poppy was feeling very sick, but it sounded like she was getting better at the end of the chapter. So I can't wait to find out what's going to happen next. This is a great book. Chapter 7 is called A Day of New People. The next day, back in the plaza, Ben Barlow organized the residents of the Pioneer Hotel into teams. The teams would work together and eat lunch together. Each team would be led by someone from Sparks, who would decide where the team's labor was most needed each day. Some days a team might work with the people of Sparks at the bakery or the shoe workshop or the wagon yard. Other days they might do a job on their own, such as repairing a fence or digging a ditch. Sooner or later, nearly everyone would have done nearly every kind of work. This was the best way for them to learn, Ben said. Doone's team included his father, 2 teachers from the Ember School, Miss Thorne and Miss Polster, Clary Lane, the greenhouse manager, and Edward Pocket, the librarian, who would join them for lunch but not work with them because he was so old. Doone found Lena in the crowd, the first time he had seen her since they arrived. He told her about the Pioneer Hotel, she told him about the doctor's house, and what she had learned from Torin about the disaster. Lena and Mrs. Murdo were told they'd been a team of 2 with the job of helping Dr. Hester since they were staying at her house. They were sent home, and all the other work teams went off to their first project, digging the hotel toilets. Ugh. They went out into the scrubby woods behind the Pioneer. The work leaders had brought picks and shovels from town. They gave each person a tool. "You'll dig 50 holes," one of the leaders said, "each one 6 feet deep. Then you'll build a shelter of scrap lumber around each one." So they're basically building outhouses. But the people of Ember have never done much digging or picking. They had to be shown how to put a foot on the shovel's edge to drive it into the dirt, and how to lift the pick over their shoulders and bring it down hard. At first they scraped and hacked awkwardly at the hard, dry earth, grunting with effort, dislodging only a few crumbs of dirt with each stroke. After 10 minutes of hard work, they'd made hardly more than shallow dips in the dirt. They were breathing fast. "Did you say 6 feet deep?" someone called out. "That's right," came the answer. So the Emberites, I think that's what the author is calling the people of Ember, the Emberites, like, I guess "ite" would be like the end of a word, or the end of a place. So you could say when we say New Yorkers, we're New Yorkers. We don't say we're New Yorks, we're New Yorkers. So the Emberites set themselves to the task, which was, for most of them, the hardest work they'd ever done. After an hour, Doone had blisters on both hands and a kink in his neck. Some of the others had given up entirely and flopped down to the ground, dripping with sweat and aching in every muscle. Doone made himself keep going, but he was glad when the work finally stopped at noon and the team leaders marched them back into the town. He heard people murmuring to each other as they walked. "Do you think we'll have to work like this every day? It'll make us strong, I guess. Or else kill us." Each team was assigned to a different household for lunch. Doone's team went with the Parton family. Through the streets of the village, they followed a stout, cheerful woman named Martha Parton, whose wide rear end wagged from side to side as she walked. It's a funny image. "Here we are," she said after a few minutes. She opened up an unpainted wooden door and ushered her 6 guests inside. "Welcome to our home," she said. Doone looked around the low-ceilinged room. At one end was a long wooden table. At the other, a couple of benches stood before a niche in the smoke-stained wall. Sitting on the benches were 2 people, who got up and came forward as Martha introduced them. "My husband, Ordney," Martha said. He was tall and narrow, with a mustache like a brown toothbrush under his nose. "And my son, Kensington." Kensington was a little younger than Dune. A skinny boy with yellow hair, big ears, and a freckled nose. He kept his eyes on the floor, except for a couple of quick, curious glances. "Hi," he said to the floor in a soft, shy voice. "And these," Martha Parton said to her family, sweeping her arm in the direction of the guests, "are the people from underground." She raised her eyebrows at them. "You're lucky to have found your way here," she said. "The only other settlements we know of are little miserable ones hundreds of miles away. Everything else is just hard, rocky dirt and ruins and grass." "And you've not only come to the right place," asked Ordney, "you've come at the right time. It's taken years of hard work, but Sparks is finally doing well." "Now," said Martha, clapping her hands, "time to eat." They sat down at the big table, and Martha brought out dishes of food. "I suppose you've never tasted anything like this," she said, handing around a bowl of fresh peas. "Just picked this morning, and this is pumpkin bread, made from what I canned of last year's crop. Good, isn't it? Did you have pumpkin bread where you came from?" "No, indeed," said Dune's father. "We did have peas, though," said Clary, "grown in our greenhouses." "And very fine they were," said Mrs. Polster loyally, "though slightly smaller than these." "Probably you haven't had pickled carrots either," Martha said, passing the dish around. "These are from my mother's famous recipe." "We did have carrots," said Mrs. Polster, "a nice pale orange, some of them fully 4 inches long." "Is that right?" said Martha. "Ours are 12 inches usually." Miss Thorne picked delicately at her food, making a polite comment now and then. Edward Pocket ate with such a vigorous appetite that he had no time for talking. Kensington ate steadily and silently. Each time Dune glanced his way, he found the boys staring at him. But as soon as their eyes met, Kensington looked back at his plate. Ordney Parton cleared his throat. Apparently this meant he was going to speak because his family all instantly looked at him. "I never knew," he said, "that there were a kind of people who lived underground. Must feel strange to you here on the surface." So all that time that the people of Ember were living down in Ember, the generations of 230-something years, that's when this disaster was happening. And now they're finally coming up and seeing, the results. "Actually," said Dune, "we aren't a different kind of people. This place feels familiar in a way, because we came from here originally." "From here? Oh, I don't think so," said Martha. "You don't look a bit like us. You're so much, smaller, if you pardon my saying so, and paler. So think about living underground. You don't have the sun, and the sun helps us grow and gives us energy and stay strong, and they didn't have that. So they're smaller as the people, and they have paler skin." "True," said Clary, "but I suppose that's because of living in a dark place so long. Everything is bigger and brighter here." "But why do you think you came from here?" Martha asked. "Because of a notebook we found," Dune said. "It was written by someone from this world who went to live in Ember right at the beginning. All the people of Ember came from this world." "Is that so?" said Martha, eyeing Dune skeptically. "Well, I must say, it's the strangest thing I've ever heard." Dune's father changed the subject. "You have such a fine, solid house," he said. "What's it made of?" "Earth," said Martha. "Pounded," said Ordney. "Strong as stone." "Thick walls," said Martha. "They make it cool in the hot weather and warm and cold." She reached for another pickled carrot. "I suppose you live in, what, some sort of burrows?" "Stone houses," said Edward Pocket, suddenly joining the conversation because his plate was empty. "2 stories, extremely sturdy, never too warm." There was a silence. "Such a lovely lunch," said Miss Thorne in a small voice. "Perfectly delicious," Miss Polster declared. The others chimed in, and Martha beamed. They all rose from the table. Martha scurried into the kitchen, came out with a basket full of cloth-wrapped parcels. She handed one to each of her guests. "Your supper," she said, "and breakfast." "Thank you," said Dune's father. "You're very generous." They filed at the front door. Dune was the last to leave. Just as he stepped outside, he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Kensington standing behind him, his eyes wide. "Aren't you the one that found the way out?" he whispered. Dune nodded. "I thought so," the boy said. He made a curious gesture, stuck out his hand with his fingers curled and the thumb straight up. Thumbs up. Dune didn't understand it, but he thought it must mean something good because a shy smile went with it. "Call me Kenny," the boy said, and he darted back through the door. Dune followed his father and the others down the street. "He's heard of me," he thought. He felt a pleasant sort of glow. Of course, Kenny was just a little boy. It was natural for a young boy to admire an older one. All afternoon they worked on the toilet holes. Dune was ready to drop by the end of the day. When the work leaders let them go, he walked down the long slope of ground in front of the Pioneer Hotel to the river. Large stones bordered the water at this point, he found one that was flat on top and sank into it, tired to his bones. The sun was setting. The western sky glowed pink. The trees on the other side of the river cast long, thin shadows across the ground. He sat for 10 minutes or so, just gazing, his thoughts swirling slowly. It was going to take the people of Ember, all 400 of them, several days to just build their outhouses. And already they were exhausted. How long before they got used to doing this kind of work? Dune couldn't imagine feeling so tired day after day. He had blisters on his hands, his wrists and shoulders ached, and the back of his neck felt hot and sore, as if it had been burned. And he was strong and young. What about the older people and the younger children? Of course they'd have to work if they expected to be fed, but... His thoughts were interrupted by footsteps crunching behind him. He turned. There was Tick Hassler, walking toward him down the field. That was the boy from Ember, from school, that Dune remembered. The one that was speaking up really loudly in the crowd. Dune's pulse quickened a little. Tick moved through the grass with a long stride, and when he came to the rocks alongside the river, he stepped from one to the next easily, never slipping or losing his balance. He raised a hand in greeting, and Dune waved back. Thinking deep thoughts? Tick said, coming up beside Dune and smiling down at him. Not really, said Dune, just watching things. Ah, said Tick. He put his hand on his hips and gazed out across the river. The setting sun shone on his face, making it glow, and draped his long shadow over the rocks. Dune wished he would sit down and talk. After a while, Tick said, I'll tell you something. Dune glanced up quickly. Tick's eyes were a blue so light it was almost startling. This is a very fine place you've brought us to, Tick said. Yes, said Dune, pleased at being given the credit. You deserve a lot of respect, Tick said. You may be just a kid, but you took action when things got desperate. You were brave. Ordinarily, Dune didn't pay much attention to what other people thought of him, but there was something about Tick that made it pleasing to have his good opinion. Somehow he didn't even feel insulted at being called just a kid. Thank you, he said. He thought surely Tick would sit down on the rock next to him now and they would talk, but instead he stepped onto another rock, closer to the water so that he had his back to Dune. They both gazed for a while at the reddening sky. Then Tick turned around and said, Really, a wonderful place. Look at all this. He swept his arm in a wide arc, taking off the groves of trees, the fields, the river, and the glowing red ball of the sun. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little curious and suspicious of Tick and why he's talking to Dune. Are you guys wondering that? Let's see. Dune, yes, said Dune, it is wonderful. We just need to get ourselves a little more comfortable, Tick said. I have ideas already. We could fix up this old building, first of all, get people organized and working together, get new glass for the windows maybe, pipe some water in from the river. What do you think? Sure, said Dune. Chet Nome wants to work with me, Tick said. Lizzie Biscoe, too, and Allie Bright. How about you? Sure, said Dune again, a little disappointed that Tick had talked to all the other people before him. You'll be great on the pipe project, Tick said, because of your experience. Dune nodded. Actually, there were lots of things he'd rather do than work with pipes again, as he had in Ember Pipeworks. But it might actually be fun to work on a plumbing project with Tick. Energy blazed from Tick's keen blue eyes. There's so much we can do, said Tick, and Dune waited to hear the end of his sentence, to hear what else he thought they could do, but Tick didn't say any more. He just bent down, plucked a stone from between the bigger rocks, turned back to face the river again, and threw the stone with all his might. It sailed high up, a black dot against the scarlet sky, and came down with a splash in the shallow water on the far side of the river. Then he twisted around and smiled at Dune, an exuberant, radiant smile. See you, he said, and he stepped across the rocks, climbed up the riverbank, and went down, back toward the hotel. When he was gone, Dune picked up his stone and flung it as hard as he could. It plunked down in the middle of the river. Not a bad throw, but not as good as Tick's. I'm very intrigued about this character, Tick. I'm really wondering what he's got in store. All right, chapter 8 is called The Roamer and the Bike. So stay tuned. We are about 1/4 of the way through this book. We're on page 90, and there are There are 338 pages. Okay. All right, guys. Miss you. See you soon.